We're back in the car studio. Welcome, everybody. Today, we're going to be talking about Super Crooks. I really wanted to love Super Crooks. I really loved Invincible, and a lot of the promotional material I'd seen for Super Crooks was giving me major Invincible vibes. I really like superhero media, and I really like superhero media that breaks outside of the typical tropes and cliches that you see inside of Marvel movies and things like that. I enjoy Marvel movies and My Hero Academia, but my favorites are always the type of superhero content that breaks the mold. On the surface, Super Crooks hits that for me. Super Crooks takes place in a world where a ton of people all over have superpowers. In this world where people are getting powers left and right, it becomes harder and harder for people to make it as a superhero. Because of this, our main character, Johnny Bolt, chooses to do villainy with his powers instead of good to make ends meet. I really like the premise of Super Crooks. It explores something about superheroes that we really haven't seen very often, and that is the supervillain side of things. So when Super Crooks kept falling flat on its face, I was really disappointed. But before we get too deep into it, make sure to subscribe and drop a like. My channel is super new and I would love to hit 100 subscribers by summer. So let's make it happen. Thank you for your support. Let's talk about Super Crooks. Super Crooks is another Netflix adaptation, but this time, instead of adapting an anime to live action, they adapted a comic to anime. The comic was written by Mark Millar, and I'd never heard his name until researching this video. However, I'd definitely seen his work before. Mark Millar worked a lot on things like the Kick-Ass franchise, Marvel Comics, and Marvel movies. In fact, he's even worked on one of my favorite franchises, the Kingsmen series. So Super Crooks was written by a veteran writer who's written a lot of quality work over the years. The adaptation had really strong creators behind it as well. Motonobu Hori directed the anime, and they even directed an anime that I've loved in the past, Carol and Tuesday. The head writer of the Super Crooks adaptation was Dai Sato, and Dai had previously written screenplays for the legendary anime Cowboy Bebop. Super Crooks had a ton of strong talent behind it, many of whom had hands in other pieces of media that I've really enjoyed. And after learning all of that, I'm even more disappointed with Super Crooks. Super Crooks could have been something incredible, and maybe the comic was. I'm not sure. My only experience is with the anime adaptation, and time again, that adaptation failed to get the bag. First off, Super Crooks isn't bad. It's decent for the most part, and it has moments that stand out. But overall, it's mediocre and lackluster that has scene after scene that constantly feels like something is missing. For those of you who haven't seen Super Crooks, let me explain the basics really quick. Super Crooks follows the story of Johnny Bolt. He lives in a world where a select few individuals have manifested superpowers, and their children also get powers, and so on and so on and so on. Fast forward to years later, when Johnny Bolt and his crew are planning a heist like no other. One that could set them up for life. Super Crooks is similar to Invincible in the sense that it takes a different look at the superhero genre. Both shows embrace the gore and violence that would come in a world filled with superpowered individuals. While Invincible explores the what if Superman evil trope, Super Crooks takes a look at what if someone chose to do crime instead of good with their powers. I was genuinely excited to watch Super Crooks, but unfortunately, it was a lot like senior prom. Disappointing. I try to keep my reviews mostly spoiler-free, however this isn't going to be the case. In order to best explain my issues I had with Super Crooks, it's much easier if I just talk about the show as a whole, spoilers and all. If you're planning to watch Super Crooks, go for it. It's decent enough and you could reasonably knock out all 13 episodes pretty quick. But if you don't care or you've already seen Super Crooks, then let's talk about why Super Crooks kept falling short. Here's your spoiler warning. Episode 1 serves as an introduction to the world and our main character, Johnny Bolt. Johnny Bolt lives with his single mother. His dad has never been in the picture, so when Johnny's powers suddenly manifest, he's very surprised. Johnny has the power to control electricity, and his power is the perfect way to start talking about how Super Crooks disappointed me. Honestly, we never get to see Johnny's understanding of his power grow. The first episode is all about Johnny and his friend trying to understand Johnny's power. We get a pretty standard training montage, and at one point, Johnny figures out he can use electromagnetism to fly. He's a bit shaky when using his new powers, but he can manage okay. Johnny's buddy ends up designing a super suit for him, and the two decide to show off Johnny's new power at the local pool. Yes, the superhero that can control electricity decides to go to the local pool to show off his powers. I get kids are dumb, but come on. Any brain cells in either of the boys would scream that this is a bad idea. And yes, it goes exactly how you think. After someone in the pool sees through his super suit and calls out Johnny's real name, Johnny panics and loses control and falls from the sky and into the pool. Johnny's powers go haywire and he fries everyone in the pool and causes a lot of other damage by proxy. To Super Crooks' credit, this scene is pretty entertaining, but the damage done isn't very clear. It's not super clear if everyone in the pool was killed or just severely injured. They sure look dead, but also in other scenes we see people getting treated in ambulances. I'm pretty sure they were killed, but also the police kinda just let Johnny fuck off, and this series takes place in America. American cops would not let someone just leave after causing a mass tragedy like that, even if they are just a kid. The show could have done something here to make the impact of Johnny's actions real. If he killed everyone in the pool, just simply put a line in there making things a little more clear. I understand that show don't tell is an important rule in writing, but the problem is that Super Crooks shows many mixed messages here in this scene. The people in the pool definitely look dead, but the police are pretty nice with Johnny and the people getting treated look alive. I wish they'd just written in a line that cleared things up a bit. They really could have just added a line like, "What a tragedy, so many people killed." Or even if it wasn't killed, a slightly different line that stated that. The cop could have said the line to a fellow officer, then moved over to talk to Johnny. Seriously, something as simple as that really could add to the impact of the moment. When the pool scene was over, I was just confused more than shocked. That aside, let's get back to the main focus of this section. Johnny's powers. We never see Johnny fly again in the show. Why not? It's never addressed, ever. In fact, past turning some machines on and off and shocking some people on occasion, Johnny does nothing. Why give Johnny the ability to fly only to never use it again? What's the point? It really wouldn't have been hard to write a character arc involving Johnny's powers. I understand his power set is probably very limited, and that's why him never using his ability to fly again frustrates me so much. They set up in the very first episode that flying is difficult for Johnny, and because of his failure to control his flight, he causes a mass tragedy. So why not simply add a few moments in the show where Johnny needs to use his ability to fly? It could be shown that as an adult, Johnny still struggles to control his flight ability. Then, later in the show, maybe one of Johnny's fellow heist members could give him some advice or help train him on how to properly use his ability. Then, near the end of the show, they could simply write in a scenario where Johnny needs to use his flight as part of the heist or to save a teammate. It's really that simple. It doesn't need to be the main focus of the story. My point is that using Johnny's flight ability in the story would serve as an easy character arc and some actual payoff for Johnny and his powers. Instead, it never gets mentioned again and gets just brushed to the side. I read around on Reddit to see if the comics uses flight ability more, but I didn't find anything. I did, however, see a lot of comments expressing the same frustration as mine. The main counter to my argument I saw was that Johnny got a lot of trauma from the pool experience, and that's why he's so lackluster with his powers. First off, no, they never mention anything like that in the show ever, not even a hint. Second off, if that was the real reason why Johnny refused to use his flight ability, then that would serve for an even easier setup and payoff. He'd have to work through his trauma in order to use his power properly. The real reason they never use it is just bad writing. I'm sorry, it's true. His flight is never mentioned again. I hope you can see why this frustrated me so much. And the unfortunate part is that Super Crooks gets more disappointments like this the longer you watch the anime. There are so many moments and characters that suffer from similar issues in the story. By the end of episode 1, Johnny figures out he can use his powers to steal money from an ATM. So he grabs some cash and runs away for good, committing himself to a life of crime. I have a lot less to say about episode 2. It's fine enough. It serves as an introduction to a few side characters, as well as an adult Johnny Bolt and his girlfriend Casey, as well as some of their character motivations. Being that episode 2 is mainly an introductory episode, this seems like a fitting time for me to talk about Super Crooks' actual intro and theme. I like the opening theme for Super Crooks. The intro song is Alpha by Tawate, and it's a super funky electronic song. I like the song choice here. It fits the general vibe of Super Crooks. It's kind of carefree, I'll do what I want kind of song, which is pretty fitting for a show that revolves around a character like Johnny Bolt. While this funky electronic song plays, we get a lot of shots of Casey and Johnny dancing, with the occasional flash of some of the other characters from the show. I like the art here a lot as well, specifically the character splash arts. I could care less about the shots of Casey's ass. I'm not an artist by any means, so it's hard for me to explain all the details that make these splashes look so good. But the point is that they do look great. I like the intro. It's sexy and fun and sets a great mood for Super Crooks. That being said, Super Crooks only ever really has the one mood and tone when it comes to music choice. More on that later. The main reason why I wanted to touch on the opening of the anime was to point out some things that I actually like about Super Crooks. The intro has a ton of potential and a lot of fun. So throughout the video, I'm going to make sure to point out scenes, moments, and qualities that I liked about Super Crooks. I didn't hate Super Crooks. I was just really disappointed. Enough about the intro. Let's finish talking about episode 2 so we can get to the real meat. Episode 2 starts with Johnny getting out of prison and his girlfriend Casey picks him up. There are a couple sex scenes in this episode and we never really get to see anything. More disappointment. I just really wanted to see Johnny's dick. We get to meet Johnny's heist crew that he runs with. His boys, some would say. I like these guys enough as side characters. They're only in a few episodes, but they bring some fun in the scenes they're in. My favorite of these boys was Kismet. His quirk allows him to give people bad luck. When he activates his superpower, batshit stuff happens. Anyway, the group tries to get Johnny on a job the day he gets out of Supermax prison. Great friends. After they leave, Johnny and Casey fuck some more and then talk about getting out of the crime business. Casey wants a normal life with her man Johnny, and Johnny lies through his teeth to her and promises he won't go on the heist the next day. The next day is where episode 3 begins, and where we'll touch on some more criticism I have for Super Crooks. Episode 3 starts with the aforementioned heist that was set up in episode 2. Johnny does join the boys on the job, and they end up robbing a bunch of jewelry stores all over San Francisco. Things start off okay until, unfortunately, one of the jewelry store's alarms goes off, alerting the police. The crew works out of San Francisco mainly because not too many superheroes are based there at the moment. The main thing I want to focus on about this episode is what I mentioned earlier. Super Crooks only has one mood of music. It honestly really hinders the quality of the show. Throughout the episode, the crew is running from the police and a couple superheroes, but there's never any tension because the entire time we still just have this kind of funky electronic music. I don't mind the music choice most of the time, and I do like the mood that it sets. However, the mood's got to fit. Because of the kind of goofy music, the entire chase sequence never feels stressful. It never feels like they're going to get caught. Not an ounce of stress or tension is in this entire episode. This problem is consistent throughout Super Crooks, unfortunately. I genuinely don't remember a moment where the music wasn't the same funky, laid-back vibe. If you don't like episode 3 because of the music choices, then drop the anime. I don't hate the music, but it's frustrating to see such another missed opportunity. You can still keep the funky electronic vibe and still have the music add tension to the scene. It's all in the way you write and compose the music. I'm not sure if it was the director who made this choice, or the composer, or what, but whoever did is a dumbass. Music is essential for the mood of a show and a scene. Take Joker, for example. That film would not be the same without the haunting score that was composed for it. The tone and mood of every scene and moment in that movie is emphasized by the score. Yet, Super Crooks has none of that. Rarely does the music assist in the tone of a scene. Honestly, the music choice in Super Crooks baffles me. I feel like Super Crooks was trying way too hard to be the next Cowboy Bebop. Cowboy Bebop is iconic for its soundtrack and music. The score is filled with these incredible jazzy pieces that all stick within the same genre of music. But There's an actual variety in tone and tension that each of these songs and pieces bring. Super Crooks' music fits nicely in a genre, sure, but it absolutely fails when it comes to the tone department. The majority of fights and heists suffer greatly from this utter failure of music choice. Honestly, this was one of my biggest issues with Super Crooks. Super disappointing. Episode 3 ends with the boys getting close to their getaway plane. Okay. Time for a few more compliments. Episode 4 begins where episode 3 left off. The boys are super close to getting away with their heist when one more superhero drops in to ruin their fun. The Praetorian. I like the Praetorian a lot, actually. He is a walking roulette wheel. He has access to hundreds of different powers and he uses them at random. There's even an entire gambling ring that surrounds his powers. People will place bets on what powers he's going to use in his next battle. He is very, very powerful and is known for brutalizing the villains he fights. This is where my compliments end for the episode, however, and the frustration begins. Episode 4 is a battle between Johnny and his boys and the Praetorian. The first ability the Praetorian uses splits him into 4 separate people. Each member of the heist crew has a one-on-one with one of the versions of the Praetorian. These fights are fine, besides the horrible music choice. We get to see how brutally powerful the Praetorian is. Each member of the heist gets the shit beat out of them. The issue I have here falls in line with the issues I had about the pool scene in episode 1. Super Crooks can't decide what it wants to be, and it's very unclear with its messaging. The Praetorian brutalizes the villains and even states how he beat the shit out of them. He explicitly says things like beaten to death or crushed to death after finishing a fight with the characters.
Crushed to death.
It's set up that he's brutal to his opponents, and then is very heavily implied visually and through the Praetorian's words that he is actively killing each of these characters. Absolutely brutal. But then, a little later in the episode, everyone seems fine besides a little blood here and there. They are able to move well enough and still use their powers in some cases. The show spends the first 10 minutes of the episode building up this hero and how brutal he is, actively implies multiple character deaths, only to quickly backtrack right after. I hate this kind of shit. It's so flip-floppy and it can't decide if it wants to be brutal and gritty or not. The other thing I don't like is that he implies that he kills all of the characters only for them to be fine a few minutes later. Like, please make a decision. If he isn't killing the characters, cut the beaten to death line and replace it with some other badass quippy line. If the writers want to keep those lines, then they better kill the damn characters. This is just another example of the lack of payoff that Super Crooks frequently suffers from. This show loves to set up moments only to instantly pull back. Watching Super Crooks really felt like I was constantly edging myself. You get so close to climax, only for the build-up to let go and it all dies down. The Praetorian in particular suffers from this issue a lot, but we'll talk about his other examples when we get there. I'm sure you're wondering how the hell the crew escapes the Praetorian. Well, Casey shows up and uses her illusion power on him in order to help her friends escape. I'm not gonna lie, I don't love this either. It's not mentioned that Casey has any powers at the start of the show because she's been hiding it from everyone, including Johnny. This feels lazy. It's not as bad of a crime as a lot of the other stuff I've already talked about, nor is it as bad as some of the other stuff we'll talk about in the future. It has been established that Casey wants out of the crime business, so maybe she hid her power from Johnny because she felt like he would pressure her into using her ability to help him with heists if he knew. I would be willing to assume that, except for the fact that later in the same episode, we find out that Casey used to be part of a crime ring herself. Oh, and she wants to do a job with Johnny. One big job so they can leave the crime life together. That really didn't sell me on why she wanted to keep her powers secret. It never elaborates on it at all, ever. The reason why this frustrated me so much is because Casey's character really doesn't make sense a lot of the time. Trust me, this isn't the only time I'm going to be talking about her. If Casey used to be a part of a crime ring in her past, then why wouldn't she bring this up with her boyfriend, Johnny, who she knows is okay with crime? It doesn't make sense to me that that would never come up. There could reasonably be a reason why Casey wants to keep her powers secret, but Super Crooks never gives it to us. I'll tell you why though. Lazy writing. In regards to that crime ring, besides a quick passing mention, we really learn nothing about it. We get to meet the people she worked with. They are a big part of the show. But as far as backstory and motivation for Casey keeping her powers a secret, we get nothing. Instead of putting in any work and writing her a real backstory, they just go, Casey kept her power secret 'cause reasons. Oh, and by the way, she's also a pro criminal. We legitimately learn nothing more than that. This is actually a problem that a majority of the characters suffer from. Besides a name and a power, we don't really learn anything more about anyone. No one has character arcs, no one has backstory, and the relationships and dynamics among the group never really change. I think a big part of this issue stems from the fact that it's an adaptation of a limited run comic series, so they were probably limited in what they could write. That being said, this still doesn't get a pass for me. Love, Death, and Robots is an anthology show where every episode is completely disconnected from the last, with unique stories, and still, most of the stories in Love, Death, and Robots contain character arcs and character growth, and they're working with limited runtimes as well. I'm not asking for the most complex character backstories or super moving and deep character arcs. I'm asking for any character arcs and any character backstory. Super Crooks is lacking heavily in this department. I wanted to learn more about so many of the characters, even just a little bit, but sadly we never do. Disappointing. Episode 4 ends with Casey and Johnny heading to Chicago to meet the villain, the Heat, who's Casey's old crime mentor, in order to learn about the big job they're going to pull in order to set themselves up for life. Okay, I don't have much to say about Episode 5. Episode 5 really serves as an introduction to the other members of the heist crew. This is pretty much the only episode where you get any backstory about anyone. And the only character we really get any real backstory on is the Heat. Trust me, everything I said regarding backstory still applies to the characters here. For the sake of future understanding, let's go over the heist crew really quick. The little tidbits of information I'm going to give you is pretty much what you get in the show. Again, there are some exceptions like with the Heat, but even with characters like the Heat, as far as character motivation and backstory go, these characters are also still lacking. Just not nearly as much as a lot of the other characters. First, we have the Heat. He's the oldest of the group and an OG in the heist community. The twist with him is he actually has no powers. He just bought a couple flamethrowers from Elon Musk and called it a day. The Heat is the one organizing the group and setting up the job. So all the other characters, except Johnny, know the Heat in some way. Next up, we have the Ghost. He can phase through objects and he met the Heat in prison. Then there are the Diesel brothers. These guys both share the same power, regeneration. They gave me Roadhog and Junkrat vibes a lot. They unfortunately have no character arcs ever. They serve as punching bags as well as an opportunity for Super Crooks to show off some more gore. That's about it. Lastly, we have TK. He has the power to move metal with his mind. He isn't really in this episode. He got his ass arrested and the crew needs to break him out before he gets taken to the Supermax prison so he can help with the job. I guess Johnny knows TK, but again, like always, that part of their history is never elaborated on, besides 1 or 2 lines. I'm not asking for a full episode exploring each character's past or anything like that. Just anything would be better than what we actually get. Anyway, that's really all that happens in episode 5. No crazy rants on this one. Let's talk about episode 6. Episode 6 revolves around the team trying to break TK out of the plane that is taking him to Supermax prison. Unfortunately for the crew, a hero decided to join the flight. This hero isn't just a nobody. It's the very strong and very famous Gladiator. I'll discuss him more later when he becomes an actual character in the show. For now though, he just really serves as an obstacle for the crew to overcome. I don't really have anything new to criticize about this episode, just more of the same issues as before. Bad music choice is the main issue here. The various fights lack any real tension or impact. Although to the show's credit, when Sammy Diesel jumps onto the plane to help his brother fight the Gladiator, he hits the propellers and explodes into a puff of blood and body parts, taking him out of the episode until he's regenerated. This made me audibly laugh. It really caught me off guard, and it was a funny as hell moment. Besides that though, and the issues I've already discussed, I've got nothing else to say about this episode. The episode ends with the crew unable to unlock the hood that is keeping TK locked up and unable to use his powers, with the plane drawing near to the Supermax prison. In order to force the soldiers to let TK out so he can use his powers to save the plane, Johnny uses his power to straight up turn off the plane.
Unfortunately though, I didn't get any tension from this moment because of how flip-floppy the writing had been up to that point. Super Crooks has made it very clear that it's willing to kill people if they're extras, but no main characters. Let's move on. Episode 7 opens with the obvious conclusion implied by Episode 6. The guards cave and let TK out so he can save their lives.
I
dislike
cliffhangers like this. It's actually my biggest frustration with another superhero show, My Hero Academia. Before you leave an angry comment that I gave My Hero a little bit of criticism, I like My Hero, okay? Chill. My Hero just happens to share this specific issue. So what do I mean by cliffhangers like this? Well, I don't mean cliffhangers generally. Demon Slayer Entertainment District arc is one of my favorite pieces of anime I've ever seen, and almost every episode ends in a cliffhanger. What I mean by cliffhangers like this is when a conflict is clearly almost over, the show will end right before the clear end of the conflict.
After the intro of Episode 7, TK gets released and lands the plane within a minute and the conflict is over. They really didn't need to make the episode before end in a cliffhanger like that.
To me, it feels like the writers know the next episode's going to be shit. So, they move the remaining piece of action from that conflict over to the next episode in order to not lose viewership. If the episode ends in a cliffhanger, the next episode better not resolve that cliffhanger in the first 30 seconds. I really dislike that. I get that this is probably more of a personal gripe rather than a reflection on the quality of the show, but I see this all over in media and I really dislike it. Demon Slayer ends with countless cliffhangers, but the next episode almost always completely revolves around that cliffhanger. The conflict continues and so does the story. Anyway, I guess that's kind of nitpicky, I'll admit it. Let's move on to what Episode 7 is actually about.
In Episode 7, we finally get to learn about the specifics about the heist and the plan. We also meet the final member of the team. His name is Forecast, and he has the power to control the weather. He really does nothing. I don't understand why he was needed, but we'll get to that. Let's talk about the crew's plan. The Heat wants to break into the Union of Justice in order to steal his client's old helmet. The helmet amplifies the client's abilities and contains some magic inside of it as well. For context, this is essentially the equivalency of breaking into the Justice League headquarters or breaking into the Avengers compound. Suicide for most villains. But our villains are super crooks! Oh, and the plan involves distracting the heroes at a separate location while they do the heist. Episode 7's purpose is purely setup, just like Episode 5 was. The issue with the setup is that it's never really clear what they're building to. The Heat is always insanely close to the chest about the specifics of the plan, even the day before the heist. He won't tell details until everyone is in. Being that the mission is so high risk, a lot of characters are out at first. Through some shitty convincing though, they all come around. Casey in particular makes the least sense to me with her motivations. She wants one big job so she and Johnny can live their lives together, but this job is insanely high risk. She's very apprehensive until she learns about Forecast and his abilities, and then boom, without even hearing the plan, she's suddenly in because a guy on the team can make it rain. It doesn't make sense. I'll have more evidence to support that when we talk about Episode 8. Episode 7 sucks, just straight up. All we get here is exposition without actually learning anything. It's also vague and we don't get to hear any specifics of the plan until the next episode when the plan is actually going down. Honestly, this episode could be cut down into 3 or 4 minutes and we'd learn just as much. That's another reason why the cliffhanger from before frustrates me so much. They knew that this episode was ass, so they had to hook it with the episode before for a little more pull factor. Enough about Episode 7. I have a lot to say about Episode 8. Some good, a lot bad.
I'm actually going to be talking about Episode 8 and 9 here. Episode 8 ends on a cliffhanger, however, this one's justified because the conflict carries on throughout Episode 9. So to keep things smooth and streamlined here, I'm going to talk about both episodes at the same time. I'm going to be blurring the lines about what takes place in each episode, and we're going to be jumping around a lot, so just keep that in mind that these are separate episodes, but we're covering them at the same time.
To start, we get more backstory crumbs. Casey's backstory has a little meat to it at least. We see a past pink-haired Casey doing jobs and using her powers for evil. Then she meets the Heat. That's all the backstory we get, but hey, at least it enforces her character arc, so I'm happy enough with it. We also get like 2 lines of backstory between Johnny and TK. this is the entirety of their backstory, it really is nothing, but at the same time, it's better than what we get for the majority of the cast, so I'll take the few crumbs I can get. The main focus of the episodes, however, is the heist. This one is a doozy. Most of my issues lie with the crew's plan to distract the heroes. So for now, let's focus on the group that is actually infiltrating the Union of Justice and talk about some of the good parts about these episodes. Once the heroes have left the Union to deal with said distraction, the plan begins. Using Casey's illusion powers, she hides all the crooks from everyone in the Union of Justice. The crew makes their way to the display room where the helmet is kept, and they manage to get the helmet. All good, right? Well, not exactly. The Praetorian stayed behind because he claimed he wasn't feeling well. His current power is super hearing, which is a major wrench in the crew's plan. After hearing the crew, the Praetorian decides to handle them himself and makes his way to the display room where he catches everyone and destroys the helmet. He reveals that the helmet was a fake because why would they keep an insanely powerful item out in the open like that? He also reveals that the real thing is held in a vault downstairs for plot reasons, I guess. This allows the Ghost to carry on with the mission and phase down to get the helmet while the others fight the Praetorian. This fight is cool enough. Music aside, it's a fun fight. The Praetorian at one point even slaughters innocent civilians in the fight, which is kind of important later. Once the Ghost gets his hands on the real helmet, he puts it on and uses the latent magic inside to teleport himself and his comrades out of the Union before the Praetorian could finish anyone off. I don't have any strong complaints about the heist itself, more to do with the distraction that TK and Forecast are performing. I still don't understand how the distraction worked. To distract the heroes, the villain Necromancer arises again and summons an entire army of zombies, so the heroes at the Union of Justice move out to take him down. I'm still really confused on how in the world TK and Forecast do anything here. Let's start with TK. When watching the show, I thought TK could move anything with his mind, so I assumed that he was actually controlling the Necromancer and the zombies. But while writing this, I found out I was wrong. He can only move metal with his mind. He's just lame Magneto. This is another example of how unclear Super Crooks can be. TK's name is TK, which really implies telekinesis is his power. And it pretty much is, just with the limitation of moving only metal. Super Crooks doesn't make this limitation clear, honestly. I'm willing to assume that it maybe has a line or two that I just missed, but they really heavily paint an implication that TK can move anything. However, the zombies are not covered in metal in any way, so he couldn't be controlling them. With our knowledge about his power's limitations, it's clear he couldn't be the one controlling the army. So how is the army there? Do they summon the Necromancer back to life? Do they just happen to know the Necromancer is going to be coming back on this day? What does TK do during this entire scene? Does he help the zombies ride bikes? If so, how does that do anything to add to the distraction? I'm very confused, and even after rewatching these episodes and digging around on the fan wiki, I still have no clue. I'm baffled at this. It's such a confusing part of the heist. The distraction is great, but why not have the characters actually meaningfully participate in the distraction? At one point, the Gladiator happens across Forecast and TK while evacuating people from the battlefield. The Gladiator is the hero who arrested TK at the start of the series, so there's a risk that he might recognize him again. When I watched Super Crooks and thought that TK was the one controlling the zombies, I thought the risk here was TK getting caught again, thus deactivating his powers and revealing the ruse. But as I now know, he wasn't controlling the Horde, so even this scene loses most of its tension. There's only the simple risk of TK getting rearrested. And why would I care as a viewer? We know almost nothing about him except that he and Johnny were in prison together, and we know nothing of his motivations past just wanting to score. Plus, his power isn't even vital for the distraction, so the plan isn't even really under threat. So TK is worthless, and the episodes spent getting him out really weren't worth anything. More disappointment. Let's talk about Forecast. I like Forecast. He has a fun personality, but even with that being said, I'm not really sure why he's here either. Originally, when I thought TK was in control of the Horde, I thought Forecast's job was to change the weather to stormy and overcast to better hide the fact that the zombies aren't real. But with the added knowledge that TK can only control metal objects, that means the zombies are real. So why does Forecast need to change the weather? If the zombies are real, then dimming the light isn't going to help sell the distraction. I guess it's for added flair? My biggest issue with this is the fact that Forecast joining the team was the vital linchpin that got Casey to join the team. The episode before, she was very against doing such a dangerous job until she learned about Forecast and his abilities. She's suddenly all in. In the episode, it's not even made clear what Forecast will be doing. The fact that he was the key that got Casey to say yes and then proceeds to really do nothing is another example of a failed setup in Super Crooks. What's the point? I really don't know what TK and Forecast do to really aid the distraction. It made for a pretty frustrating viewing experience. Every time Super Crooks cuts to this part of the heist, I just got more and more confused. Let's cut back to the other half of the crew. The teleportation spell cast by Ghost takes the crew to Count Orlok's location, their client. Payday! Until the Praetorian shows up and freezes everyone in place. Unfortunately, he found their location. Not thanks to him being a hero, however. Here we get what I think is the best reveal in the show. The Praetorian has been working for the Bastard the entire time. Wait! Who's the Bastard, I hear you asking? Well, I haven't really talked about him because up until now, his role in the show has been minuscule. Let's talk about the Bastard and why he's an absolute disappointment of a villain. Throughout the show, we've heard talk of the Network. The job Johnny did at the start of the show was actually for the Network. The Network is a network of supervillains that organize jobs and provide assistance to super crooks with the cost of a cut of the job's earnings, and it is all run by the Bastard. The Bastard's been mentioned in passing on a few occasions, with the most prominent being a story that was told to the characters about a time the Bastard slaughtered everyone connected to someone who crossed him. I only really want to talk about this guy once, so we're going to cover him entirely here, issues and all. So the first thing I really dislike about the Bastard is the failure to set him up. The show tries, sure. We see him kill a few times, and the Network is mentioned a few times, but there's no impact or reason for it at all. Until we get the reveal that the Praetorian is working for the Bastard, there's zero connection between him and our main cast. Everything revolving around him is super disconnected and forgettable. It felt like when writing him as the main villain, they knew they had to build him up, but instead of actually building his connections and making his threat known to the viewer, he's just mentioned or shown in super disconnected scenes. It felt like the writers checked a box.
Hey, did we mention the Bastard in this episode? Yeah, we got 2 lines about him. That should count as build-up, right?
Another issue I have with the Bastard is the lack of commitment. This is more in line with the pool scene in episode 1. Sometimes we see the Bastard blow the brains out of people for teeny crosses, and then other time he's just like, whatever, I don't care. In a lot of moments where the Bastard kills, it happens off screen.
Super Crook tries to be brutal and gory, but constantly pulls its punches. Half the time, the kill will take place on screen, and the other half, it takes place off screen. I really wish it would pick. If you want to be brutal, be brutal. Just please commit to a mood and a tone. There are some moments in particular that it really felt like they were trying to censor the show by cutting away. These issues plagued the Bastard throughout the runtime of the show, and honestly, I never found him as a compelling or threatening threat. I did, however, really like the Praetorian as a villain. This is one of the rare cases in Super Crooks where a character actually gets built up and has a character arc. For now, the Praetorian is pretty much the same. Still popular while living under the facade of being a hero. That's going to change after today's battle, however. The Praetorian taking out civilians in this episode starts a bad string of events for him that we'll discuss a little later. Back to the episode.
So the Bastard and the Praetorian show up at Count Orlok's hideout pretty quickly after the heist. They know the location of the hideout because the Bastard used to work with Count Orlok and the Heat, so he kind of knows where their hideouts are. They're not here to take the helmet back to the Union, however, but instead to punish everyone working outside of the Network. The Network controls almost all crime activity in the world at this point, and they heavily punish people who work outside of the Network. So they showed up to punish. The Bastard blows the shit out of Count Orlok's head for hiring a job outside of the Network, and the Praetorian takes the helmet back to the Union. And that's how the heist ends, in utter failure. Time for episode 10. I know I've mentioned a lot of details and plot points that really rubbed me the wrong way, and everything I've said still stands, but I want to make it clear that I really think Super Crooks had a lot of potential to be something much better. Episode 10 is a great example of this. Casey and Johnny actually have some character arcs across the story. They're not perfect, but they're at least there. Episode 10 is really the climax of their character arcs, and I really like the choices the writers made in this episode. Unfortunately, I think some of the consequences of episode 10 get ignored and pushed aside later in Super Crooks. But for now, let's focus on what's good about this episode. After the failed heist, the crew goes to a bar and drinks their pain away. Fights break out and everyone goes their own ways. Casey and Johnny head back to the bay, and once they're home, Johnny pops the question. Casey wants to settle down and live a normal life. That was the goal of this entire job they just pulled, and Johnny finally caves. He tells Casey all about how he's ready to spend his life with her, and the moment is sweet. They plan the wedding, and the day before his wedding, the boys show up and kidnap Johnny for a bachelor party. After a night of partying, a drunk Johnny shows off that he can use his powers to get cash from ATM machines whenever he needs to. Being drunk off their asses, the boys convince Johnny to do another job with them so he can get Casey a nice wedding gift. Cut to the boys, all still very drunk, but this time suited up, cruising around San Fran, stealing from countless ATM machines. I really like this. It fits Johnny's character really well. All through the show, he's been shown to be reckless, and he still chases the thrill of the job. Sure, he proposed to Casey, but he's never demonstrated a real change in his behavior. So it makes sense that he would be easily convinced to do a high-risk job right before his wedding. Unfortunately, they don't get away this time. Johnny gets caught by the gladiator and gets sent back to Supermax. Casey is left standing alone at the altar. After learning that the only ones missing from the guest list are Johnny and his 3 friends, she instantly knows what happened. She leaves in tears and sets her wedding dress on fire. And then the episode cuts to 5 years later. About 10 minutes before in the episode, it shows a pregnant woman, and when the time jump happens, it shows that woman again with her young child. I missed this before and just thought it was a cool and creative way to show off the time jump. We get to catch up with the Heat first. He's still doing the same kind of thing. This time trying to run a grift on a casino. This goes badly and he gets caught and his partner gets killed. The Heat then gets told that he has 30 days to come up with $100 million or else. Cut back to modern day Casey. She's working as a waitress and is not happy when Johnny just waltzes back into her life. I like the way both characters act in this scene. Johnny just walks in expecting for things to pick up where they were 5 years ago, but Casey isn't having it. She's done with Johnny and makes this very clear. Thankfully, the pair has the Heat stumble in asking for their help with his situation. I think this episode is the best in the show when it comes to characters. Johnny and Casey both fit within their established personalities really well. Johnny actually gets punished for his arrogance and pride when he gets caught and sent back to prison. Casey was already really frustrated with Johnny and his antics, so when he does another job and gets arrested for it, she's not waiting around. Unfortunately, things don't go much better for Casey, but at least she's willing to say no to Johnny now. Sadly, I do think this episode gets cheapened a little later, but we'll talk about that when it happens. For now, let's move on to episode 11 and discuss some more frustrations. Episode 11 starts with Johnny rounding up the crew. He goes to their various locations in order to recruit them for a job. Super Crooks gives you no reason to care about any of them, so to be honest, I don't really care where they were, so I'm not going to talk about it. Johnny is keeping the specifics of the job super close to his chest again, not even telling anyone who the target is. I hate this. The Heat did it before as well, and it's such a major pet peeve of mine. I think a lot of heist shows do this. It doesn't make any sense logically for the crew members to join the team again without knowing what the heist is. It makes sense to keep it all kind of close to the chest for Johnny in case anyone spills the beans, but still, whenever I see this in a heist show, it frustrates me. Please actually write a decent enough motivation or desire for the characters to act on, rather than just saying, "Oh, this cool badass has a plan, trust me, baby." There's a new member of their team this time, however. The Gladiator. Yes, you heard me right. In order to speak to the Gladiator and get him to join the job, Johnny sets up a date with the Gladiator's alter ego. Oh yeah, by the way, the Gladiator is gay. That's pretty cool. I really love the way the show treats his sexuality. LGBTQ representation is really needed more often, so I was super happy to see this. Instead of the Gladiator's sexuality being his entire focus or his whole personality, they don't address it till episode 11. And every time they do, it's in passing and treated as normal. This is amazing.
Media is really important in how we view the world. The way that Super Crooks treats the Gladiator being gay so nonchalantly really gives the impression that being gay is normal. Which is great, because just to be clear, being gay is 100% normal. Even if representation feels shoved in, it's still overall a good thing. I just personally think that representation that treats a character's sexuality or identity as just another part of their character, rather than the full focus of that character, is the better way to go. Don't get me wrong, stories about someone's sexuality or identity can be incredible pieces of art that can really help you learn about their experience. I just think that unless that's the focus of the story, LGBTQ representation is better done when they treat those characters just as other characters. I find it much better to mention their sexuality or identity in a situation where it actually matters, like this scene. I think a lot of LGBTQ representation is taking this route, and I'm pretty happy about that. Instead of a character being gay becoming this self-masturbatory thing that studios do just to check a box, it's becoming more genuine representation, and I think that's pretty pog.
In order to get the gladiator to join the team, Johnny blackmails him by threatening to reveal the gladiator's many affairs to the public and his husband. The target is the bastard, who in the last 5 years has retired from his position as a crime lord and has used his time to open a private casino on an island south of Japan. The Praetorian spends his days there as well, working as the head guard after he was kicked out of the Union and stripped of his title of hero, after being accused of misusing his power as a hero. The newspaper clippings we see highlight the fight a few episodes ago, so it's safe to assume that burning up some bystanders in the fight really hurt the Praetorian's image. Johnny also offers to donate the gladiator's cut of the prize to an LGBTQ charity because he knows the gladiator wouldn't do it for the money. The gladiator begrudgingly agrees and the heist is a go. The episode ends with everyone getting on the island. They show TK using his power to fly people over to the island, but this annoys me again for the same reason the necromancer stuff did. If he had normal telekinesis, then this would be fine, but TK can control metal, so unless everyone is wearing metal underwear, this is another inconsistency with his power. I'm willing to assume they could figure out a way to make it work even with the limitation of only being able to move metal, but this scene still bugged me. It's just another example of the show being really unclear. And that's where episode 11 ends, and where the final heist begins. Episode 12 starts with Casey and Roddy doing some reconnaissance work. After they've collected the needed information, the crew begins discussing the heist. Underneath the casino is a large network of rooms filled with traps, and at the end of these rooms is the bastard's 4D briefcase that contains all of his wealth. The island is also equipped with massive machines that deactivate powers, so they plan to turn off said machines and then use their powers to move through the rooms before they finally reach the vault. Johnny also gets everyone new suits to better hide their identities. That's all fine and dandy, but here's where we come to my issue with the episode. Casey's out thinking on the beach when Johnny comes and joins her. I've got real mixed feelings about what's to come. They talk for a bit, Johnny finally apologizes to her, and Casey's back to falling into his arms. I'm completely fine that they got back together. My main issue is how cheap it feels. Johnny left her on their wedding day, and for 5 years, the pair hasn't even as so much as spoken a word to each other. Casey was furious at Johnny when he waltzed back into her diner a few episodes before, and now she's suddenly back to swooning for Johnny.
I'm just not convinced. Besides this one apology, Johnny's done nothing to show Casey that he's changed. Earlier in the show, he apologized, and then instantly went back on his word. I'm just not convinced that Casey's character would fall right back into Johnny's arms like this. It's been 5 years. I'm totally okay with them rekindling the romance and getting back together. I just really wish the show did more to convince me that that was justified. I guess this criticism is more up to the individual and their personal tastes, but for me, it felt very lazy. It felt like they're checking boxes again instead of writing compelling character interactions. I would have really liked to see moments where Johnny actually has to show Casey that he's changed instead of him just being, "Sorry, ooh woo," and then they get back together.
Again, this one is really up to the individual and their personal taste, but I wasn't convinced by this scene. Time for the heist. The heist starts with the crew splitting into 2 groups, with each group needing to shut down the 2 separate power dampeners. After some antics, both crews manage to get the dampeners shut down and they start using their powers to better fight off the defenses. Meanwhile, Casey's trying to fly home when the Praetorian and the bastard catch her at the airport. They've figured out that she is not actually the scientist that she portrayed herself as at the beginning of the episode, and so the episode ends with them taking Casey captive. Final episode time. It's time for the finale! Spoiler alert, it's pretty underwhelming. To start, we do get a pretty decent scene. The final trap the crew must make it through is a molecular chainsaw. This thing cuts anyone who isn't the bastard into tiny pieces. So, the Diesel brothers race through it. They keep getting chopped to bits, and once they're regenerated, they get back up and run some more. I really like this scene. Watching the two characters get chopped to bits over and over while classical music plays is pretty entertaining. Once they make it to the end, they deactivate the chainsaw and everyone is able to walk through safely. The crew collects the briefcase and takes a selfie to celebrate. Cut back to Casey. She's being interrogated by the Praetorian and the Bastard. During the interrogation, the Bastard gets the wise idea to check the camera feed, where he sees everyone robbing him. So he sends the Praetorian down there to take care of the business. This is my biggest issue with the finale. The way the show chooses to take down the Praetorian feels so cheap and disappointing. After the Praetorian beats the shit out of everyone, the Gladiator steps up and proceeds to beat the shit out of the Praetorian. It's not even a cool fight. They just punch each other a couple times, and then it cuts to a knocked out Praetorian. Super Crooks has built up the Praetorian as a big baddie the entire show. He's beaten down Johnny and the crew multiple times, so instead of actually writing in a cool or clever way the crew could defeat him, they just write in the Gladiator. I kinda like that the Gladiator joins the heist crew, but legitimately all he does is fight the Praetorian. It would have been so much more satisfying if instead of just having the Gladiator handle it and throw a couple punches, the entire crew teamed up to help the Gladiator in order to fight and take down the Praetorian. It's such a missed opportunity, and this underwhelming moment really sours the finale for me. It's just so disappointing. At least Casey's finale is nice. Casey is still captured by the Bastard and he blows her head up. Well, at least he thinks so. Casey used her illusion powers to switch places with the Bastard's assistant, and she escaped while they were trapped in the illusion. So, she got out, and the Bastard actually killed his assistant. The episode ends with a Where Are They Now segment showing all the characters off with their money. And that's the end of the show.
Wow, this video has turned out to be far longer than I ever expected. When I watched Super Crooks, I knew I had to do a video on it. I was just so baffled by some of the decisions that were made by the writers and production crew. The show has a really great concept, but it unfortunately falls flat repeatedly. The runtime is littered with lazy writing, bad music choices, and characters that lack growth, motivation, or character arcs. Even the few characters that have arcs, their arcs are still weak and unconvincing. Even with all my criticism laid out, I still liked Super Crooks. That's why I was so frustrated when it kept falling flat. I really wanted to love Super Crooks. I'd been eyeing it for months, and when I finally sat down to watch it, all I came out of it with was disappointment. Maybe the comic is better. I don't know. I've never read it, and I never will. If you've seen or read Super Crooks and you liked it, please understand I'm not trying to hate on this show. Super Crooks had a lot of really great qualities, but unfortunately it was just hindered by everything I laid out. If you've managed to sit through this entire video, thank you. Please subscribe, and I'll see you next time.
Don't you worry, it'll be okay. Don't you worry, spit and come, you make my life okay.